A global hub of commerce, culture, and opportunity, New York City has attracted Muslims from all over the world. New York is also a place of unique challenges, with its skyscraping cost of living and its status as the capital of capitalism. I've come here to discover what it's like to be a Muslim in New York City. Altogether, there's about 200 masajid in New York City and almost 1 million Muslims. This accounts for nearly a quarter of all the Muslims in the United States as a whole.
My relationship to the university started in 2000 when I was an undergrad here at NYU.
I visited the New York University Muslim Center in Lower Manhattan to meet with Imam Khalid Latif, who serves as the chaplain at NYU.
During my undergrad, there was a lot of things happening in terms of geopolitical realities globally. September 11th took place, and as undergrads, we were arguably the closest Muslim community to the Ground Zero site, being right here near Washington Square Park. So we had media from all over the world that was engaging us, asking us, what do Muslims think? We did a lot of programs and activism in response. But fundamentally, the university that we were a part of didn't really understand our presence. They hadn't felt its impact.
Wanting to change the narrative about Islam and Muslims, Imam Khalid went on to start nonprofit initiatives that positively impacted the community.
If there's not those who are in your immediate proximity that are feeling the benefit of your faith and your practice, like Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he seeks permission from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to leave from Mecca at one point. An individual by the name of Ibn Daghina, he asks Abu Bakr, where are you going? And he said that it's too difficult for me to practice and worship my God here, I'm leaving. And Ibn Daghina, who's not Muslim, says to Abu Bakr that you can't leave, because if people like you leave, then our entire society will lose the benefit of your presence.
Being in Manhattan presents certain challenges to Muslim leaders like Imam Khalid. Though many thousands of Muslims work here in Manhattan, sky-high renting costs have forced most of them to seek housing in other boroughs of the city, like Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. This makes community building not so straightforward here.
There's a lot of Muslims who their engagement with faith is not rooted in utilizing the masjid as their sole apparatus, because New York City has a lot of storefront type masjids, right? There's musallas that I've prayed in that are literally like in the basement of barber shops, people trying to just figure out how to make it work. And they're then establishing other mechanisms to create community for themselves. The masjid is like an integral component. It's a very key institution, but it doesn't have to be the only institution. I could just come into this room and just pray in the room, and it's amazing. And that's all that it's made for. And if somebody wants to do like a poetry reading, it doesn't have to be in this room. It's very hard to have one space that is all things for all people. We're talking about 2 billion people in the world that literally represent every lived experience you can imagine, right? How can you possibly find all of those people in a localized space? What's beautiful when you go for Hajj, when you go for Umrah, right, and you see like the Haram filled to capacity with people of all different walks of life. Those cities are so unique, and those places are so unique. And you're going there to fulfill a certain need, but when you come back home, you're still dealing with the realities of life.
The beating heart of Manhattan is Midtown. Strolling down its overstimulating avenues, one thing you notice immediately is an abundance of halal food carts, a hallmark of New York City street food. Halal-style platters originally started with the Halal guys in 1990 when they opened their first hot dog cart and then later transitioned into doing the famous gyro and chicken and falafel over rice. It originally started to feed the Muslim taxi drivers who would be driving all over the city and would need food at any time of day. So the halal guys was born, and soon halal carts started to spread all over the city, and you can find them pretty much anywhere now. But the trick is you need to know the good ones, because there are so many now that some of them have secret recipes and secret seasonings, and that makes them a lot better than the average cart you might find on the street. Halal cart food has been so popular in New York City that New Yorkers think of halal as this style food, the gyro chicken over rice with white sauce over it. They don't realize that halal just means halal meat and the way that's slaughtered, making it permissible for us to eat, and it could be cooked in many different ways. And today you can find halal carts all over the city, in every borough, on every street corner. And it's really cool to see Muslims, hustling in the street. A lot of times they're playing Quran, you see them taking prayer breaks, and they're really here hustling. A lot of them send money back home, and it's good to support our Muslim business owners. Here with my boy Shamik, childhood friends. Got in the same crusty old van to go to school together for years.
Bro, we treasure those memories now.
We tried Idle's famous halal cart, one of the most popular carts in the city right now.
Just something about it. So like the spices, the white sauce, the rice. There's a competing restaurant like just down the corner, right? But there's just something about it that brings people like lining up here like down the whole block. So it's crazy.
Favorite food cart in New York?
Favorite food cart in New York, hands down, easily.
We feasted on our idols and then went for a walk in nearby Central Park.
Yeah, so we're actually in Central Park right now. I'd say Central Park is my favorite thing about New York just because it's kind of like a fantasy land. A ton of work went into making this land in kind of the middle of like this concrete jungle, and like it really shows because like it's beautiful when you just come out here and just like take a walk.
Shamik moved to New York City 2 years ago from our hometown of Irving, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Was moving to New York always a goal for you?
Yeah, so I happened to study CS, computer science, right? And when I was navigating the kind of the career search, I knew that I just wanted to be like, some sort of software engineer. And so I actually honestly thought that I would be in San Francisco, right? Because that's where like a lot of the technology jobs are.
Yeah.
I never had a goal to come to New York, honestly. I saw that, there were some open roles that I saw in New York that I just happened to apply to. But there was never like some sort of like overarching goal of like landing in New York. I would say like a lot of things that happened to me that ended up being very good for me, by the grace of Allah, like it was something that just kind of happened, and I went with it because I had a lot of other friends that were also going to be in the city.
So what are some things that you really love about New York?
The creativity. So like if I were to have been in like, I really find the energy of the city like very electrifying. If I were to have, one of the options was staying home in Dallas, and I love Dallas, I would operate a little bit more slowly than I do in New York. And so like here, there's really a push and a drive to like, be creative and be a little bit more outgoing and not do the usual thing. Here, like the energy of the city is very electrifying, but so is kind of like how hard everybody works. So I would say like some of the hardest workers in the whole country live in New York, right? In terms of like a white collar perspective, but I also mean from a blue collar perspective. White collar and blue collar jobs, you'll find some of the hardest working people in this city.
What differences are there being a Muslim in New York and being a Muslim in Dallas?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say like in terms of being a Muslim, right? I'd say like just because the place that I live in Dallas, I'm surrounded by really, really great Muslims. It's a little bit easier for me to like be very conscious of like the daily acts of worship that I do in Irving. Over here, I would say it's much more of the masjid that rises out of like a need to get the prayer and done, get the Jummah done, like fulfill the obligation that we have as Muslims. I would say one thing that's missing though is kind of the feeling of community. So the place that I pray Jummah, it's very much like kind of like a masjid that arose out of the very practical need to fulfill the obligation for people that were working in the city. A lot of the people that attend are like working as traffic police or like food cart operators, right?
Yeah.
And so like it is a little bit of a different environment. I still feel like the fulfillment that I get of being at a masajid, but the community aspect is a little bit lacking there.
Would you say you need to have more personal responsibility for your spirituality living in such a big city?
Yeah, I'd say so. You need to be a little bit motivated to go out of your way to make sure you fulfill what's required, and also to try and go above and beyond. It's a lot easier to go above and beyond in Irving, right?
Like a lot of people in Irving use the masjid like a service. They get mad when there isn't stuff happening. They're like, where's the programs? Where's this? Where's that? Well, the thing is that people who do that a lot of times are volunteers, and they're just like anybody else. You can't expect really that there's going to be programs without putting in effort yourself. And it's easy to lose sight of that when there's so much happening for you. But in New York, you realize that. You realize that you have to get involved yourself. You have to do stuff yourself and be very intentional as a Muslim.
Can't put it any better than that.
In the northernmost part of Manhattan is Harlem. No trip to Harlem is complete without seeing some of the most iconic parts that relate to Malcolm X's legacy. Malcolm was originally the minister at Temple No. 7, based in Harlem, New York. And he was supposed to head up the monumentous task of expanding the Nation of Islam to New York City. When Nation of Islam member Johnson Hinton was brutally beat by the NYPD, and not only that, but he was not able to receive medical attention and was forced to stay in this police precinct, the community in Harlem was very angry, and it got to a point where it was a full-on riot. When Minister Malcolm X of Temple No. 7 was informed of the situation, he led a group of orderly Nation of Islam soldiers to go protest in front of the precinct. This was important because at this time, the Nation of Islam was not very understood by the local African American community in Harlem. But after this incident, Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam became a very well-respected institution in the city. Malcolm X was able to defuse the situation, to take hold of the crowd, and to safely and securely extract their brother Johnson Hinton from the police precinct. Seeing the effect that Malcolm X had on the crowd led one police officer to remark, "No one man should have that much power." The streets of today in Harlem are a far cry from the situation they were in Malcolm X's time. Back then, he was engaged in the tough task of cleaning the streets from drug users and drug dealers. They actually had a force of people that would help newcomers to the faith wean off the drugs, and they would keep them in a room and wait throughout their whole experience of withdrawals and everything, and give them everything they needed, food, water, until they were finally clean. And they did this person by person, cleaning up the streets of Harlem one by one. Developers and real estate moguls have taken advantage of the hard work that Malcolm and his followers put in to clean up the streets. Harlem's black population, a thriving majority since the 1930s, now makes up less than half of the population and is decreasing rapidly. After several years as a minister, he went to Hajj, and that was when he had the transformative experience that caused him to open a new masjid called the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood today, but originally was called Muslim Mosque Inc. After Malcolm was assassinated, Temple No. 7 was burned down, and after it was rebuilt, it was burned down again. When Wallace D. Muhammad took over the Nation of Islam, he renamed it Masjid Malcolm Shabazz, and he made it a Sunni masjid. Amid a sudden downpour, I found refuge in Le Baobab, a Senegalese mainstay that serves a large Senegalese community in Harlem. Delicious fish and okra stew with spicy flavors. You can taste the pepper a lot. Best way I can put this juice, tastes like grape Lucas candy. The New York City of the past required a certain toughness to get through the in-your-face challenges of the city. But today, its challenges provoke a more internal source of conflict.
Capitalistic society, it creates not a greed that is stereotypical in the sense of I want to rule the world, but it makes you unsatiated with what you have. And it doesn't allow for you to really sit and think about when is something actually enough. This consumer-driven society is bombarding me with imagery constantly that tells me my happiness is situated in buying what it is that they're selling to me. And now you add in New York City that there's a billboard every 2 feet. Every cab has an ad on it. There's all kinds of just stores, restaurants, everything in your face. There's a certain chaos that exists in New York City, that you're just constantly moving and constantly flowing. People, they are in a space where they're not so present, right? You're moving, but you're just running on default settings. And the awakeness that comes from the engagement of ritual and practice that allows for you to have an internal component suddenly starts to mute itself. And I think one of the things we find is a diminishing of places of stillness, right? Where do people really go to reflect? 'Cause it's easy sometimes to just physically prostrate, but to get to a place where you're really prostrating with your heart, right? Like you're able to bring your entire being to it. The agitation subsides, and there's a real tranquility and calmness. It doesn't happen so much.
For the Muslims who live here in Manhattan, Khalid Latif's NYU Muslim Center is one of the few places that offers free classes and programs on a regular basis.
I'm just trying to build as much as I can while I'm here. I don't think that Allah gives any of us a platform to be self-serving, and with a recognition that there's an existence after this. It's really about how do you utilize what's been given to you in the best way, and to leave things a little bit better than how you found them.
New York City is an amazing, dynamic, and truly international city. For years to come, this city will attract hardworking Muslims seeking to make their livings and to positively impact the world. I've only scratched the surface so far, and I'm excited to discover more of the Muslim New York City experience.
Called Bed-Stuy, right?
Yeah, Bed-Stuy, yeah.
So what was it like growing up here?
Roughly a decade ago, I had co-founded a charity, and that charity was infiltrated by the New York City Police Department.
It's somewhere nice to visit, but I don't really want to see myself raising a family here. Feel me?
Do you think the American dream is still alive here?
I want to say